So Barraskewda has finally been quick banned from Scarlet and Violet. In our lovely NU Council, we held a suspect vote. Not a suspect vote, just a normal council vote on both Barraskewda and Florges. And the results were that everyone voted to ban Barraskewda, bar a single person that abstained. Whereas with Florges, we had 2 votes to ban and then 6 votes to not ban, with the pretty decent implication there will be a suspect test, or at the very least, a survey following up that includes Florges on it as a candidate. So let's talk about why Barraskewda is getting quick banned. And we can look at Talkie's post real quick here too. It's pretty simple. I think the easiest thing to compare Skewda to is going to be Bruxish. Of course, there are some differing factors. Bruxish, it has a better ability, and it has the lovely Psychic Stab. This means that Bruxish doesn't have to Terra to have a secondary stab move. And this also means that Bruxish has a little bit different defensive utility. It's a little bit harder, quote-unquote, for a common Scarfer like Metacham or Passimian or Revenge Kill You, for example, because they can't just go for their stab attacks. They have to result in going for coverage. Whereas against a Barraskewda, well, its most common Terra type was always fighting. And so that doesn't resist the CC from a Passimian or a Metacham. And so that does make it a little bit more susceptible to those kinds of revenge killers. But what separated Skewda enough from Bruxish, and of course its other competition like Floatzel and to some degree Basculin, well, it's that speed tier, baby. And in tandem with the coverage, which is where you do see some similarities at least to Bruxish. If we think about what are common Skewda checks, you're going to think about Pokemon like Vaporeon, you're going to think about Quillfish. You might even think about a couple Pokemon that are using a certain Terra type, like say Terra Dragon, Sandaconda, or I don't know what Terra type Appleton would use, but maybe Appleton is a Terra type. But if we start thinking about these Pokemon, you gotta remember Skewda's coverage. You've got moves like Close Combat, you've got Psychic Fangs, you've got Crunch, you have Ice Fang even, if you want to run that for like Terra Dragon Conda, even though Terra Fighting CC would be better. It's still there, and that means that a lot of its checks are constantly having to hopefully predict right, and this is a little difficult given that a lot of the Skewdas running around weren't even running Choice Band. We saw a decent amount of people just say Heavy Duty Boots is good enough, because they felt that Skewda was already going to be good enough offensively, with its great coverage and still really high attack. And of course that great speed stat limiting offensive counterplay quite a bit. We'll get back to that in a moment. But you saw people experiment with Boots, because that helps mitigate passive damage, and you saw some people, shoutouts to Joey and me for running the set, you saw us use Life Orb. And although that means you're going to be getting chipped down a lot, constantly in priority range, or general just revenge killing range if you don't one-shot something, Life Orb gave you still a great boost to your damage output, while in the meantime you don't have to lock into a move. So it doesn't matter if you go Vaporeon on my Close Combat, there's nothing stopping me the next turn from going for a, Terra Fighting CC or a Terra Dark Crunch, or just any move predicting you to double switch, for example. And that helps a lot when you're trying to get around your checks. Something like a Bruxish. One of the reasons that maybe it's viewed a bit more easy to handle relative to Barraskewda, for example, is because it's commonly always Choice Band. There's a little bit of variance when you start talking about Swords Dance Bruxish, but naturally, a set like that's got more issues, because it's not getting that huge damage boost that you kind of need, I feel, when you're using Bruxish to get by a lot of your common checks, namely Vaporeon. And the issue you run into there is if you're not banded, Vaporeon's just not getting two-shot. And Swords Dance Bruxish, it's just not commonly running Terra Psychic, which otherwise would at least help you bypass a Vaporeon, let alone, consider Terra Dark Vappa was something that could always shut down a Bruxish. You don't worry about that with Skewda, because Vaporeon's common Terra types, they're not as impactful. Terra Fairy is still kind of annoying, but at the very least, you still have Psychic Fangs you could throw off at it. It's like a decent enough attack, whereas a Bruxish is, when it's facing the really bad Terra type, it doesn't really have a lot that it can do, because your water moves are walled. Your Psychic Fangs, that's walled by Terra Dark, and then what's your last move? It's probably like Crunch? We're seeing Crunch a lot more now than Poison Fang, just because people have kind of decided, Cacturne's not very bulky, so I'm going to do a lot to that. And so that makes it a lot more difficult defensively. And so, now we want to talk about offensive counterplay, of course, because that's another way you can mitigate a lot of these powerful attackers. We've always seen historically in Pokemon these just absolute nuclear wall breakers that have really no good defensive counterplay, bar maybe a couple mons that can sort of pivot around it. And some people say, alright, let's talk about offensive counterplay, because that's still valid. Well, the issue with Skewda, of course, is how fast it is. Compared to Bruxish again, there are a lot of Pokemon that outspeed Bruxish that do not outspeed Skewda. Let's just go down the list real quick. So you've got Floatzel, for example. You've got... Let's keep going down the list. You've got Oricorio. If you're max speed, you're faster than Bruxish. You've got Paldean Tauros. You've got Zoroark. You've got Haunter. You've got Scyther, Lycanroc. These are all Pokemon, and there's even more right here. Like, even Jolteon, I think, is actually worth mentioning in this context, given that Jolteon is the fastest Pokemon in the tier that's not named Skewda. And so you've got so many Pokemon that's just no longer considered offensive counterplay when you're looking at that huge speed gap. Because remember, Bruxish is down like, what, base 96 speed? Around there? Barraskewda is base, I think, 135. So although the Scarfers, like your Mabostifs, your Metachams, your Passimians of the world, they all still plenty reliably revenge kill a Barraskewda. There's no question to ask there. Skewda's common Terra types are not helping it much. I get a little bit against Mabostif if you're like Terra Fighting or Terra Dark. That's still helpful. But otherwise, you're just getting CC'd in the head. Which is still fine. You know, that does mean there is offensive counterplay, but it's so much more limited. And imagine being told, yeah, if you don't have your Scarfer, you just lose. GG, well played. Don't really feel like that was too healthy for the tier. And so as a result, you look at that distinction between Bruxish and Barraskewda, where their offensive profiles are just so similar, but you still got a couple things that help separate Skewda from Bruxish and make it, at worst, an equal from a wall-breaking standpoint. It's when you start looking at the speed where I think it really becomes different. And even the bit of extra leeway, at least in my eyes, that you have when you're picking an item to run on Skewda. And I'll talk about Florges real quick too, because we voted on Florges. It just didn't get banned. I'm one of the do not ban votes, and this isn't because I think Florges is necessarily something that should stay in the tier. It's more that from using and playing against Florges, I haven't been sure that it is something that is so above the rest of the format that it needs to be banned. Now, I'm not saying that I think it will stay for very long. I mean, we're looking at Florges counterplay. You've got, like, what? Assault Vest Electros to pivot around a Specs Florges. You've got, like, Muck. You've got... I feel like we have other Pokemon to mention. Oh, Vaporeon. The Vaporeon Muck cores are really annoying for Florges, especially if it's Sticky Hold on Muck, which should be used more in general. I don't know why it's always Poison Touch when you already have Poison Jab and Toxic and T-Spikes to throw off poisons anyway, but that's beside the point. That core is kind of annoying because Specs Florges is never making any progress. You still have Pokemon like Chansey around that, yes, Trick is debilitating, but you still pivot around it. Oricorio, Bale, I've at least experienced that Florges does not consistently break past it, especially if it's starting to get quivers up. So there is some counterplay still around to it. Some of the Berserker as well, Assault Vest Berserker. It is 3-hit KO'd, but at the very least you're a one-time switch-in, and with Wish support you can come back into the fold later on. And if you're looking at Calm Mind Florges, I think the main issue from that angle is just that it does take a little bit of time for that mon to really get going. And again, I mean, Haze Muck's just kind of perpetually annoying for it to deal with. You really gotta make sure you got the proper team support. Now, of course, only having one Pokemon being mentioned consistently as like, yeah, this mon just shuts it down. There's some room to say that might not be healthy, and that's where the survey/potential suspect tests do come into play. So we'll see on Florges. But yeah, Barraskewda banned? Potentially a survey or a suspect test in the near future. Hope y'all enjoyed this video. Of course, if you did, leave a like. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and I will see you next time. Peace.